What's going on, everybody? This video is going to be about Sheffield United against Chelsea, focusing on Chelsea in possession, Sheffield United in their defensive phase, and Chelsea in their defensive transition. So let's get right into it. And Thomas Tuchel went with his favorite back four. It looks like that's what Chelsea is going to be using for the foreseeable future. And Sheffield United started with their 5-3-2 as usual. So in the build-up phase, Chelsea went with their back three and their double pivot of Kovacic and Jorginho. And then, interesting, the role of Mason Mount in the 10 position. He often favored one half space moving in or out to them, and this was very fluid motion, but he was more of a natural 10 and had the versatility to go to either side in the half space, while the players like Timo Werner and Olivier Giroud, who's just above your screen here, while they were pinning the back five, especially the wide center backs, and then the wide players were being pinned by the wing backs of Chelsea. So with Mason Mount as the 10, it allowed them to create more fluidity and more dynamic advantages into the half spaces rather than just having two attacking midfielders start in that position. And by moving to one side, it also created the opportunity to overload the half spaces and create the free man. So one of the biggest things here we know Chelsea played with their back five or back three and build up, and then wing backs got higher, and their double pivot, and with the three-man front line occupying the central corridor. Now we can see how Chelsea tried to draw Sheffield United out and take advantage of the shifting mechanisms that Sheffield have used for as long as they've been in the Premier League under Chris Wilder. So when one wide center back would go to progress the ball, because the two center strikers were really focused on using their cover shadows to prevent access to the double pivot. So when the ball would go wide to a center defender in the half space, this would oftentimes elicit a wide midfielder to jump. And when this happened, there would often be space in behind this player to then take advantage of where Mason Mount, Timo Werner, or Olivier Giroud would check into. And at the same time, because of the vertical partnership, then we would have a wide center defender oftentimes jumping into this space as well to close it off, which would then elicit Chelsea to make runs in behind. So all things we can think about going forward and as we look at Chelsea's play. So now the ball moves over, and we see now the interaction of Chelsea's player in response to the shifting of Sheffield United. So we have our back three in the build-up phase and our double pivot, and I'll even highlight the double pivot's connection with the wide center defender just to show the decreased distance that is created when using a double pivot with a back three. And we can notice that it's between opponents, so very well positioned to create strong connections in between the opposing team's block. So now, moving forward, we have Sheffield United's front two, very space-oriented, don't step out of position much, because if they're caught to one side, it could really unbalance their team. We have the midfield three. And then now, I'm just going to highlight the three center defenders for Sheffield United. So here's the base structure, and now this is going to be really important when moving forward. So as the ball arrives with Rudiger, we have Sheffield United player who could jump out and step to the ball. So I'll do that in red just to keep it coherent. So Sheffield United midfielder potentially jumps out to progress the ball or to stop progression of the ball, which then elicits Timo Werner to come deeper. And now this is when the dangerous situations occur. So we have our wing back running in behind, Ben Chilwell, and Mason Mount running through the gap created through center backs. So Chelsea look to draw the midfield out, and if the space isn't there to be taken advantage of between the lines, then the space will be there to take advantage of in behind. So it's really a ripple effect. If A doesn't work, then B is the next option, and if B doesn't work, then C, the last resort, will be open. So now, just looking at this again, Rudiger doesn't play the ball in behind quite yet, but he's able to always, if he wants to get out of pressure, he can then move further forward, and Timo Werner, the player checking, if he doesn't spin off, he can just rotate into the wide area and restart the attack just through a simple interchange in possession. So, but then we can also see the commitment to the defensive concepts by Sheffield United. The center defender steps all the way out, keeps tracking him, which creates numerical equality at the back, which is quite dangerous when you have Mason Mount, Ben Chilwell running in behind. So just one thing to think about, and then we have our midfield three and our front two. So their compactness was quite good from Sheffield United, as it usually is, and which is why they're in so many games. But now just the finishing touches on execution around their box, cleaning up some mistakes, and then scoring their goals when they come. But so now another picture of them in possession, and now we can see all three forwards, or the two forwards and the 10 in the same frame, looking to pin the wide center backs, and then give Mason Mount time and space in the 10 area, as we can see here. So just wanted to highlight that, show the shape. But again, we go with the back three, double pivot, and now we really see the separation from Sheffield United with them jumping forward, and because of the pinning of Olivier Giroud, we don't see Sheffield United players jumping to close this space down, just because there's not enough players when Chelsea pin like this. And even in this type of situation, if Giroud would check, then Mason Mount would look to get in behind, or Mason Mount can check into the space and take advantage of the midfielder from Sheffield United jumping. So again, we see their horizontal connections are stretched, and then their forwards obviously space oriented, so they're not. So when this happens, the space in the half space is very open, but this gives Chelsea the advantage to manipulate the mechanisms from Sheffield United to then either access the space or to get in behind. So now in the build-up third, just wanted to show once, because again, Sheffield United do very well when structuring themselves, and I just wanted to show the slight difference in shape. So the most central defender comes alongside Mendy, and then the wide center back just go slightly outside of the half space into the interior part of the wide corridor, still maintaining the double pivot. But now I would like to talk about Sheffield United. So even when they step into their high block, they still go with the 5-3-2, and they cover a good amount of space here. And it's important to note that the forwards, the interaction, but just the positioning, just a quick side note, the positioning between the wide center midfielders and the forwards. So we're going to be looking at the positioning of these two players here. And it's just important to note that they're not on the same line in the half space. So one is occupying the interior corridor while one is occupying the exterior corridor. So obviously the wide central midfielders are wider, which puts them in closer proximity to the wide center backs, while the forwards are more narrow, taking care of the double pivot, as well as being able to jump to now the two center backs created between the most central defender and Mendy. So now, moving forward, we can see a slightly different shape now from Chelsea, and again, very fluid movement. So this isn't uncommon. The double pivot usually don't ever position themselves vertically like this. This was just to manipulate the defense, try and create connections and get on the ball for Kovacic, and Jorginho rotates higher, so they'll switch. So Kovacic will come into this position, Jorginho will drop deeper. But just for right now, they're on the same line. I showed this picture more to show Timo Werner checking into the space. Timo Werner checking in, and Mason Mount occupying the weak side half space. And so now with Timo Werner checking, we have our Sheffield United center defender jumping with him, creating space in behind. And now Giroud isn't really the player to occupy this, but now Giroud is the higher player looking to pin while Timo Werner checks. And now we have our wingback as well, pinning the wide wingback for Sheffield United. So now we can look at how Chelsea manipulate the space to get him behind. So here we have it, with Giroud coming towards the ball now, and now Mason Mount looking to get him behind with Timo Werner. So he checked into the deep area between the lines, pulled the wide center back out to then make his run in behind. So, and the thing with a back five, which is quite difficult for Sheffield United, is keeping their line all in reference to one another, because there are more players you have to now control and more players to hold the line. So even though this line looks good, we have our weak side wingback who's deeper than everybody else, so gives Chelsea players an extra yard to run into in behind, create more of an advantage. And then it begs the question on when do the center backs hold their position, when do they track the run in behind. So quite difficult. And now the space-oriented midfield and forwards, and their job is more to put pressure on the ball and not allow free service in behind. So I felt these players could have done better in certain situations at doing this, not giving Chelsea the opportunity to first make these free runs in behind and then followed by a free pass. But then the same sequence leads to this, with Mason Mount and Timo Werner in behind with almost a 2v1 at goal. So now moving up the field, we are going in the second half to show the patterns here. So we still have Giroud as our lone striker. But the key now is the back three, especially against the Sheffield United low block. Azpilicueta will oftentimes be the player jumping alongside the double pivot, which creates this 3-2 structure, but this was very fluid in. With the 3 center backs and 2 holding midfielders, they can definitely change their positioning and move into the half space, and then Kovacic can drop. But the rest defense consisted of a mobile 3 center back and 2 holding midfielders, which was more than enough to control Sheffield United in their offensive transition. So now, just want to show the compactness of Sheffield United. They have very good compactness and very good defensive structure, so it's worth noting. But now, instead of the wide midfielder stepping out to press the wide center backs, the center strikers do it, which might be preferable in the low block because of the danger that's created if we have midfielders jumping out and losing their spatial orientation in the low block, because then spaces will open up and the team will get stretched in an area which is very not good to become stretched in. So now, moving forward, we're going to start moving into the defensive transition and counter-pressing for Chelsea, but just wanted to show the same structure used in the second half. Still have Mason Mount as the 10 and our wing backs. And the only difference was now Sheffield United started to move out, tried to isolate Chelsea's possession to one side, and so they started pressing a little bit more, which is why we see these open spaces, and Sheffield United's forwards stagger to try and pin to one side, cut circulation, cut holding midfielders, and then we see the midfielders from Sheffield United step a little bit because they don't have the double support of the strikers to take care of the holding midfielders. So the Sheffield United players will step to try and close down the space, but in doing so, the space opens between the lines, but with pressure on the ball, they look to win it back rather than let Chelsea exploit this. So now we're going to look at the offensive transition. So the ball was just played here, played from this position, and we can see it's going in behind. So Giroud was checking towards the ball with runners going in behind him. So we're going to look at how Chelsea responds. So this is Mason Mount coming deeper, and we have our wingback and Timo Werner around the ball. So now we have our players. So we have Olivier Giroud, Timo Werner, Reece James, and then we obviously have Mason Mount, who we just saw, and Azpilicueta, who played the pass. But around the ball, the picture favors Sheffield United, even though Giroud is in a good second ball position, because Sheffield United have proper support behind the ball, and now their midfielders and wingback are just arcing around where the ball is going to land. So Sheffield United is obviously favored to win this, even though it looks like Giroud might be in the best position. So now, when Sheffield United do, right away we see the reaction from Chelsea players looking to get back and press the ball. So this is quite good from Chelsea's counter-pressing, especially in the midfield third. Game just started, so they close down the space and their options, so they're more option-oriented, but it can be a tendency to go more man-oriented, as Mason Mount does, to rather not see the deeper options. So he jumps, but good thing Reece James is there with pace to catch him up, because we'll see what happens. So by Mason Mount jumping towards the ball with Giroud, this frees up the wingback for Sheffield United, which forces Reece James into a recovery. So just wanted to point that out and show that Thomas Tuchel will probably work on this and go to more option-oriented rather than a man or ball-oriented. But just to end the picture, we see that Chelsea get back just fine, and they have proper cover around the ball, especially with the back three, that they are able to isolate the ball and win it back. So hope you enjoyed the video, hope you learned something, and I look forward to making more.